After leaving the Royal Navy, Geoffrey Gudgion was a corporate warrior in technology companies until he fell out with his Californian CEO and became a freelance consultant. Writing filled his unbillable hours and eventually took over. He's the author of two published novels, Saxon's Bane and Draca, both subtly supernatural thrillers, and he now writes full-time. His extract from the Vriesian Witch, is that pronounced correctly, Geoff?
Vriesian, yes. Close, close.
Which is currently being pitched to publishers and is in the very different genre of historical fantasy. Welcome, Geoff.
Thanks, Lucy. I should explain that this book I should blame this book on my agent, actually, who had such a problem selling the last two books because they were cross-genre. He told me to go away and write something that was fitted firmly within an Amazon tick box. And he actually pointed me towards historical fantasy and directed me towards the work of Guy Gavriel Kay. And I read Guy Gavriel Kay and thought he was absolutely wonderful. So this came from that initial conversation. So the Vriesian Witch is historical fantasy. It sits somewhere between Guy Gavriel Kay and, say, George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones. So it's pure genre fiction. The other, and the context of the book is the clash between a male-dominated organized religion, might have echoes of medieval Catholicism, and a shamanistic belief system. And the other thing that he said is, whatever you do, write with a female protagonist, which is a bit of a challenge for me as a bloke. But he loved the result. The main character, Adelaise, you're about to meet, is developed into what will be at least a 3-book series. So in the first book that you're about to hear, the first chapter, the first page of, she's something of a victim of circumstances. By book 3, which I'm about to start, she will be almost a Joan of Arc type of character, the kind of icon around whom armies will gather. So the context also is very rough, is redolent of 14th century France, if you can imagine that. And as I say, historical fantasy. So here is Adelaise. Adelaise knew the winds by their smell, even when she could not feel their touch on her cheek. From the east, they'd reached the sister house along the slow-flowing stream that carried so much sewage, it was called La Pissotte. It curved around the capital's walls, a stinking barrier between the sister house and the crawling mass of the capital, Bane, half a league to the south. Veer a little south of east, and there might be hints of a richer corruption from the great gibbet dangling its thin fruit outside the city walls at Moncran. The west wind was cleaner, laced with wood smoke from the sister house and its hilltop hamlet of Montbeauvoir. By the time it sank downwards through the vines covering the south-facing slopes, it was sweetened that spring with the fragrance of daffodils. A carpet of them nodded their egg-yellow heads in the orchard. To Adelaise, also called Adelaise van Vries, when the eldest daughter chose to smear her contempt for anything from Galmandi's newly conquered province, the rare northerly breeze was the fairest, no matter how strong or cold or wet, for it carried memories of home, fading but bittersweet, the way incense clings to wool. On a morning in the first days of the fasting moon, the wind blew from the foulest quarter of all, for the south wind reached Montbeauvoir across the great crenellated midden of Vilbene. It choked on 1,000 fires, festered in the city's tanneries and slaughterhouses. It eddied in fetid, piss-trickling alleyways and flowed over the encircling bone-grey walls into the slums piled against them. The wind pushed soldiers, merchants and wagons northwards along the Great North Road at the foot of the hill, and in half a league of greening fields, it had no time to lose its smell. It broke like an invisible wave against Montbeauvoir's slopes. And when it reached Adelaise, tending the sister house's vines, it still carried the taint of packed humanity, living and dead, from scented lord to manure-footed stable boy. And that morning, through the Porte du Nord, like a maggot falling through the teeth of a skull, the south wind blew the procession of the priest that the people called the Angel of Death. Adelaide paused, leaning on her hoe, not understanding the strange entourage emerging into open country. She often saw soldiers on the road, and sometimes a mounted priest, but she'd never seen soldiers escorting priests. 2 of them. Both wore the white habit and black hooded cloak of the Anacretim, the order charged with maintaining the purity of the faith. Yet there was nothing to fear at first. In all probability, they would be going to the clerical complex at La Source, but nonetheless, Adelaide watched, curious. The Anacretim were known for their fervent asceticism, yet the one in the lead rode a destrier befitting a great noble. Even the junior Anacretis, riding subserviently half a horse's length behind, sat on a grey too fine for any vow of poverty. 2 mounted soldiers cleared the road in front of them, though their task was easy. Traffic scrambled out of their path into the verges and ditches, the way a pond's shoals of little fish will part and reform around the hunting pike. If Adelaide squinted into the sun, she could make out the blue of the royal badge on the soldiers' surcoats, even at this distance. King's men, escorting clerics. War soldiers followed, bunched on their horses behind a wagon with a solitary prisoner lying on its boards. He might have been chained, but it was too far for Adelaide to be sure. She wondered if there was to be an execution, for prisoners who had been put to the torture often had to be carried to their deaths. But no crowds followed to see the spectacle, and there were quicker routes to the killing grounds at Montgrand. She pushed an end of black hair under her kerchief as the procession approached the crossroads below the escarpment. Once she'd had tresses that hung to her waist. Her Jan had run his fingers through them, making them flow through his hands so they become honey gold in the sunlight. At home in Friesland, they said pale yellow hair was touched by the flax. But Jan had lifted her locks to his face, saying it could never be flax. It was finer than any silk. Now it was hacked so short that she only saw loose ends. Long hair was vanity, the eldest daughter had shouted at the assembled convocation the day Adelaide had arrived. She'd made the weeping, humiliated Adelaide stand in their midst, her head rough shorn into tufts that were blooded where she'd struggled. Vanity! And the punishment for vanity, the eldest daughter had thundered, was leprosy. It was written. Those who thought they were fair would end their lives as outcasts, watching their own faces rot away. Below her, the wagon rolled in a rut. Close enough now for her to see the prisoner contort as if in pain. It was definitely chained. A slight unease began to grow in Adelaise's mind. They had no baggage, so these important Anacretim were making a visit somewhere nearby, not starting a journey. Adelaide could read the rank of people on the road by the way they travelled. A humble cleric would normally walk, swinging a stave with a bag thrown over his shoulder. A knight would have at least 4 horses, one to ride, one for his squire, one for his baggage, and a war horse prancing along with a leather roll of chainmail and a great helm tied to his saddle. Merchants travelled in their wagons, plodding south laden with Campenois grain or Vriesian cloth and rumbling north empty. Bane sucked in food and spat out priests and soldiers, but rarely in the same cavalcade. And I'm going to stop there. You'll gather that the inciting event, which is the arrival of these priests, is about to happen.
Great, thank you. So ex-Navy bloke has authentic eye about the human condition, the weather and power. No surprise that the narrative is both richly descriptive and suitably insightful. That is from Noel. Wonderfully atmospheric from Laurel. James McDermott, it reminds me of a recurring nightmare, the classic tome, Malleus Maleficarum. Lots of atmosphere from Carolyn, wonderful detail from Tim. Excellent, lots of lovely feedback. Any can I say what you said about Amanda, don't stop there. That's from Kate. Any comments in person people want to make?
I thought that was very filmic. I could see that watching that on the screen, Geoff. Really did.
I have to say it was huge fun to write. Having been, it was almost written to order, this one, as something which my agent thought he could really sell. Though I have to say he's had it so long I've almost finished the sequel without selling it. So but once I started writing this, the character of Adelaide took over, and I can now see at least 3 books. I've nearly finished book 2. I can see book 3. There might even be a book 4. And it's fun. I'm enjoying it.
Great. Well, that's what we want to hear from a writer, that they're actually enjoying sitting in their garret writing. And you managed to get some horses in there as well. So well done there. Looking forward to more of that. Okay, one more comment. We enjoyed it too from Semra. Thank you very much. So we're on to our last